realize that, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. They made that decision to pull, so that we watch the building collapse.
They ignored it because they wanted it to happen. Every full starts with a false flag operation.
The Soviets had been winning these tournaments, and I thought it would be good for America, for democracy, to have an American win it. Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State. Hello, and welcome to Historica Esoterica. I am your host, Matt K. Ultra, joined as ever by
Roswell.
And this is a historic episode, as we are joined by my twin brother, who we have decided to call Mike K. Ultra. We hail from the K. Ultra family.
It's Italian.
Michael, how you doing?
Good.
Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
I know that you have listened in the past, which I appreciate.
Oh, yes. I'm probably your biggest fan. Mainly because I don't see that many other views on YouTube, so I just use that as my reference point.
Rude, but fair.
Yeah, I think we do fine on the other platforms. No need to dox our numbers. We don't want to make anybody else jealous.
Oh, yeah. Of course not.
It's below 100, but above 50.
Yeah, there we go.
1,000.
Yeah.
1,000, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And today we're going to be discussing a figure who looms large in his particular field. Bobby Fischer, of course, the prodigious chess player. But before we hop into it, Michael, do you want to tell us just a little bit about why I had you in particular come on for this one, aside from nepotism?
Yeah, of course. Well, I'd say that nepotism probably tops the list, but I'm coming in as a close second. In the K Ultra family, as we are frequently referred to. I'm known as the biggest chess fan. I like to play the game a lot. I've been studying and trying to improve for this last year, and along with that, I've kind of just taken an interest in some of the more historic figures, some of their top games and stuff. And so it's kind of hard to do that and go over these games without also kind of picking up on some of these little stories and personalities that are behind these players. Because you realize that even though they're all top level, I think sometimes people get this misconception about the game where it requires the same robotic play from everyone. But in reality, the strengths that you get from these different players come from their different strategies and different approaches. And so just from our discussions, I think we realized that it'll be kind of a fun one to talk about, just this particular character of Bobby Fischer.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I'm sure, Matt, that there was nothing strange about his life. That could warrant it being on this podcast. He was just normal.
If there is one thing that the listener knows about Bobby Fischer, it is probably that he lived a famously very normal life after playing chess. But yeah, no, so I'm much less talented in the world of chess than Michael is. I've stopped playing with him because he just is too good and defeats me every time in an embarrassingly quick amount of time.
You can always play down a queen, or I could play down a queen, but Matt refuses that too, just because that would be too embarrassing. So
yeah, the handicap, that's the same as him saying, like, yeah, I'll play blindfolded in another room and still get mate. Like, but I share Michael's interest in, the personalities involved, particularly as in this time period. There was a lot of Cold War stuff going on as well. There was a lot of politics bubbling under the surface of chess. Roswell, how familiar were you with the world of chess before this episode?
0%, because I'm not a dork. But no, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
I had no idea that chess was such a big deal to so many people. My conception of chess was it was a fun game I would play with my grandpa. I didn't think that I didn't know it was also a sport. But obviously I'd heard that there was like some more higher level chess. I didn't realize it was that big of a deal, especially in the time period we're looking at. It's insane to me. But I actually had heard the name Bobby Fischer a few times before because I think he's so ubiquitous in American culture that it's kind of hard to avoid, which is very interesting considering it's such a niche thing, in my opinion. And I live under a rock, and I had heard about Bobby Fischer. So I think that says something about the importance of at least one event in his life on American culture and American history.
Yeah, and as we go through things, I'm gonna ask you guys a couple questions at a few different points about Bobby Fischer's particular relationship to chess and how I think undeniably it caused a massive uptick in interest in chess on the American side of things. But Michael, before I sort of like jump into his biography, did you have anything more you wanted to say on things?
Sorry, you just mean like just in general about what we're going to be talking about, or?
Yeah, just sort of a general, like a preface, if you would, to the novel we're about to read.
I think it will probably be hard to translate or convey entirely, like just in this little podcast. But I would add that the more that you look at his games in particular, the more evident it becomes that his personality really did bleed through into his gameplay, and so it's just really interesting to look at. I'll just throw that in there, and hopefully we can illustrate that to some extent. But
awesome,
yeah.
I'm just going to start with some. No, I have to be honest. We just spent maybe 45 minutes waiting for my roommate to finish playing music loudly in the shower. So if we seem a little out of it, it's because we have now spent an hour trying to get started on this podcast, which we will now.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to start with some basic biographical information, and we're going to jump into his early games, and either of you guys feel free to chime in pretty much whenever. Okay, so he was born in 1943 in Chicago, Illinois, to one Regina Vender Fischer. Gerhard Fischer is listed on his birth certificate, but it's widely believed that he was not his actual father, and that his actual father was the Jewish-Hungarian mathematician Paul Niemi, I believe is how you pronounce that. Quick sidebar about him, by the way. He was a socialist in his early days, but left Germany in the 30s because it was not a great time to be Jewish and in Germany in the 1930s. And so he ended up getting recruited into the Naval Ordnance Laboratory in White Oak, Maryland, which is just, I couldn't find anything that he was doing that was raising my eyebrows. But he got recruited by the bomb making factory. Like, just make like the big cartoon bombs with the big fuse going into it. So that's just an interesting thing. So Regina was a Swiss immigrant and the daughter of two Polish Jews. And I would, at this point, like to note the only reason that I point out that both of his parents are Jewish, because ordinarily that is not something I try to focus on. Not that kind of podcast.
No.
But just sort of put a pin in that part of his heritage because it'll become important later. Yeah. We're not going to be anti-Semitic, but
no.
Oh boy, Bobby is. Yeah. So Regina was also a communist, and the FBI had like a huge file on her.
I was about to ask you about that, Matt, because I found that very interesting in the documentary I watched. They kind of breezed past that, but they were like, yeah, she was a communist and kind of an activist. They showed her at many sit-ins with signs and stuff, talking about ending war, which, good thing to talk about ending. But like, so do you know anything more on that? Because they sort of just breezed past it.
I didn't find a ton about her activities because honestly, I didn't look super closely. He and his mother had a very strained relationship from a very young age, which they talked about in the documentary. Just a side note, the one source I think that we all shared this episode is a 2011 documentary called Bobby Fischer Against the World. And it's pretty good. There's a couple things about it I didn't love. We'll get into those when we get to them. But as a general source, I think it's very interesting, very good. But yeah, so they get into it a little bit, right? She worked 2 jobs for very long, from a very early age. And so she would just leave Bobby and his older sister, whose name escapes me. They would just be left unattended for very long periods of time. But yeah, I couldn't find any evidence of her actively plotting to take down the American government, unfortunately, because that would have been pretty cool.
Too bad. Yeah, I know. They mentioned that there was folders and folders upon her that the FBI had, which to me kind of struck me as odd because if you've got someone being communist and they're just kind of going to rallies and stuff, I don't know how the FBI writes up their documents, but folders on folders usually means they're up to something nefarious. But
yeah, I mean,
it was also the 60s, so
I would say this is the Hoover era of the FBI.
Yeah, exactly.
Where, they were recording literally everything you did if you
true.
weren't an ex-Nazi, pretty much. Yeah. Side note about Hoover, though, broken clock is right twice a day. I don't think I remembered to write this down in my notes, but apparently one of the write-ups that the FBI did of Hoover stated that it said Bobby Fischer is clearly insane, and Hoover wrote in the margins, "I agree," which takes
dope.
one to know one, I guess, but he is right. Okay, so let's see. He was taught the rules of chess at age 6 by his mother, and was immediately hooked. He later said in an interview, someone asked him, when did you start playing? He said 6. And they're when did you get good? He's 7.
Yeah.
He would
he
play.
was sort of immediately enamored by the game. And I think, maybe later if we talk about sort of the psychology of Bobby Fischer, it makes a lot of sense that he kind of just threw his entire life into this game. Mm-hmm. But it became, I don't know if I want to call it a hyperfixation. I mean, I think that's fair, right? To call it a hyperfixation.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah,
almost immediately. Yeah.
Yeah, he would play dozens of games, often against himself. He would just sit at the dinner table, next to his bed, wherever he was going. He had a little chessboard, and he was just playing games after games after games against himself, which I can see how that would drive you crazy, but I can also see how it would make you really good at chess. And he had a pretty natural talent for it. He was so obsessed with chess that his mom actually took him to a psychiatrist once. And the psychiatrist was basically nah, I'm sure this won't lead to anything bad.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, there was something about
music plays.
If I remember correctly, there was something about, he could be doing worse things than chess.
Yeah, exactly.
And to be fair, he did.
Yeah. He was right.
That is a funny, that is such a 1940s psychiatrist to be yeah, it's probably fine.
Yeah,
he'll be all right.
Don't worry about it.
Wait, your wife is arguing with you? Put her in the asylum. She's insane.
Yeah, she's gone.
She's gone.
So in 1956, he began training under the chess master Jack Collins, who's also a genius in his own right, and taught a lot of the most gifted chess players at the time. Michael, did you know much about Jack Collins? Did you have anything to add there?
I didn't look too much into him specifically. I remember hearing that name, but I glossed over that. My problem was when I was actually going through this documentary, so the thing that we're drawing similar information from was kind of what stood out most. I was at work while I listened to it, so I wasn't exactly taking notes or anything.
No, that's all good.
But yeah, anything you got? Curious.
Do you know what year John or Jack Collins died, Matt?
I don't actually. Let me know.
It was 2001. So
interesting. I'm just saying, maybe I'm the reincarnation of Jack Collins. Who knows?
Well, no, that's what I meant.
Well, that's the angle I'm taking.
Okay. That's exactly where my mind went to. I was pretty sure that's what he was getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, okay, hang on. Let me pull up his Wikipedia because I thought it was funny. Yeah, so some people called him, and this is a direct quote, the Yoda of American chess, because of how many people he's trained. Including William Lombardi was the first name that I saw that I recognized. Another guy who is less crazy than Bobby Fischer, but definitely equally eccentric. Like for a while, he was a Catholic priest, and then because I guess he was trying to get out of the chess game, so that was what he went up to. Just very interesting. Like chess attracts weird minds a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But anyway,
like Michael.
Yeah, like Michael.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then in 1957 is when he really rose to national attention, when he became the youngest ever national master before he was even 15 years old. I think he was like 2 months shy still of his, which that's
very
crazy.
Impressive.
That's very impressive.
Yeah.
Now, I was sort of under the impression from the documentary I watched and some of the stuff I read that like his mom pushed him kind of into the spotlight, but then I was also under the impression, like from what we talked about earlier, that she was also a little reticent about his chess stuff. Do either of you have any?
That was one of the things I didn't love about the documentary. Because one of my other sources was the book Endgame by Frank Brady, which it's all about the Avengers. No, it's it's about Bobby Fischer. Yeah. And he doesn't go quite so far as to imply like this. The documentary sort of implies that she was like trying to turn him into a child star.
Yeah, that was the implication I got too. But then like it sort of contradicted itself where with some of the interviews she was sort of like, yeah, chess is Bobby's thing, and it's not really, I don't really care about that. I care about ending Vietnam, or you're like, all right,
which fair enough.
Yeah.
Credit where it's due. So the impression I've always gotten is that it was complicated, right? Like I think she definitely she knew that her son had a gift. Like everybody,
absolutely,
even the people who hate Bobby Fischer, no one's going to go, actually, he wasn't good at chess.
Yeah, he kind of sucked, honestly.
And I think she probably did enjoy that he was receiving attention for it, but I think she also, particularly as it wore on and clearly began to drive him insane, went like, ooh, maybe we should pump the brakes.
Well, and also like, I also don't. I'm trying to be careful, not point the blame at a single mother, because I understand how tough that is. But like, I kind of got the feeling based on the information I heard that like his early life, sort of the kind of jumbledness of the way they lived, moving from home to home, and like never having a father figure consistently there, and then finding out the incorrectness of his parentage at age 9, and then being rocketed into the spotlight at 15. All of that sort of informed, I think, the buildup of things that would lead to his inevitable breakdown. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think from the beginning, Bobby was probably a little predisposed to be a bit unstable. Yeah. And I think his upbringing definitely didn't help.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that I was thinking as well, which you can take this for what you will, but to me, I was wondering how much of this, where they had these two different like conflicting ideas of like how his mom treated him. Obviously you can have two different opinions and stuff like that. You might go back and forth between them, but I was thinking, we also need to keep in mind that Bobby pretty much like from the get-go was sort of a peculiar and paranoid person, and so it's possible that some of the mixed messages we're getting comes from the fact that he was also giving his own perspective on this, and he might be ascribing a little bit more to her about this, like, oh, she wanted to share my fame, or she wanted me to like be the star, whatever exactly it is that he was proposing, because it did seem that he had a strained relationship with his family as well.
Absolutely. And luckily, none of us know anything about being peculiar or paranoid.
Yep, none of us. Yeah, it is worth noting. I did forget to say that off the bat, but yeah, Bobby Fischer is sort of an unreliable narrator from day one. So
absolutely,
he has to take everything he says with a healthy dose of salt.
I think paranoia too. I'm glad you brought that up, Michael, because I think paranoia is kind of one of the many, but one of the main continuing threads throughout the Bobby Fischer saga. And I think when you look at where he ended up and then kind of trace it back to like the beginning, that sort of untrustworthiness and like, I guess, anxiety about things trying to hurt him is sort of present all throughout his life. And it makes that that end note of his life and career that make that much more sense.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so hang on, let's see the next thing I have. And by the way, Michael, interject whenever if like you think I've like skipped over an important date or an important game.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But in 1958, he flew to the Soviet Union, which is in and of itself, that's wild. That's just a thing he did in 1958, when a time when pretty famously we weren't getting along very well with them. Yeah, he flew to the Soviet Union where he played flash games against several prominent Russian players, and then demanded to play against world champion Mikhail Botvinnik. This demand was turned down. Although
briefly though, I want to say, do you know how he got those round trip tickets to the Soviet
Union? Do you want to tell everybody?
Yeah. He was on a game show called I've Got a Secret, which I don't know what that is, but certainly an anonymous title. I don't know if I guess he won. I think it was a panel game show.
Yeah, I've seen like a couple episodes of it, and it's very weird. I still don't entirely understand the premise because I'm pretty sure it literally is just 3 people trying to guess your secret.
It's like riddles in the dark from The Hobbit.
Yeah,
What's
exactly.
in my pocket?
Yeah, pretty much. Because I saw one where it was like this like ancient man who looks like he is already a little dead, and his secret was that he was like present at the Battle of Gettysburg.
Pretty sick secret.
Yeah, which I mean that is a dope
secret. First off, why was it a secret? Was he not supposed to be there?
Yeah, I was gonna say he did fight for the Union. To be clear.
Oh, good. All right, cool. Not
he's sitting there in full Confederate apparel, and I wonder what this man's secret is.
No.
But anyway, so yeah, he played on I've Got a Secret, and his secret was in fact that he was a nationally known and acclaimed master at chess.
Not much of a secret, really.
Guessed?
It's nationally known and acclaimed.
Yeah, as you say, it's not much of a secret. But at this point, chess was still a little bit of like it was a novelty, and we don't think of it that way now, in part because of Bobby Fischer. But back in the day, it wasn't sort of the universal shorthand for like, this genius sitting up there playing chess with himself. Yeah. Like it was just sort of like kind of a weird thing. It was for hobbyists. But as
it was
a side
like
note,
building Warhammer figurines.
Yeah, exactly. But as a side note about Botvinnik, the world champion at the time, he trained several other very prominent Soviet grandmasters, including Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov, 2 favorites of mine. And Kasparov, later on in his career, would go on to lose a chess game against Deep Blue, the chess-playing computer robot, which is its own sus rabbit hole. I'm not going to say that they cheated, but they cheated, and Kasparov was right to be mad at them. Anyway, just wanted to put that out there. And
I
so
forgot you had that
Bobby's
take on that.
Yeah, I'm a Kasparov truther, man. But also Fischer's fairly volcanic personality, I think, was on display even back then. Because he would refer to the Soviets as Russians, which is very funny when you think about the Soviet Union's makeup. But he was very mad after he learned that he wouldn't be like playing any official games. He would just be playing flash games. And he wrote a note saying that he would not be playing any, after learning that, yelling that he was, quote, done with these Russian pigs, and that he would teach them a lesson.
Which he did.
Yeah, which seems to have been his modus operandi for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Interesting.
But yeah, so that's just like the paranoia, it was all there from the beginning, I think.
Yeah. The kind of the misplaced rage, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
I think a rage that, I don't want to psychoanalyze the guy, but like, it's very clear that rage, it's not because the Russians or the Jews as groups did anything to him.
Yeah,
particularly, right? There's something deeper there and more personal.
Yeah, as towards the end of the episode, I have a couple questions about that I'm going to ask you guys. So we'll really dive into it then. So now I'm going to jump into sort of like the Cold War era aspect of his games. So first, I do just want to note the Soviet Union for a very long time was crushing it on the world stage in terms of chess. In 1972, when Bobby Fischer eventually played, when he won, that ended a 24-year win streak that the Soviets had been holding.
And weren't they like really putting a lot of? Well, first off, I think it wasn't very popular in Russia as a sport, chess.
Yeah,
and they were putting a lot of like money and effort from the government into like churning out chess players.
Yeah, because this is it. It was an ideological thing. They viewed chess as like a very communist pastime because whether you're rich or poor, if you're good at chess, you're good at chess. So they would like send talent scouts into these like little Russian villages. Like you could like apply to these like very powerful chess academies. And,
Wow.
Because it was the Soviet Union, these weren't like elite things you had to pay buckets of money for.
Right.
And that's, just to get on my little commie soapbox, I think that is in large part why the Soviet Union was so good, was they understood that chess, if played properly, can be a class equalizer. And they, and later the Americans, realized very early on that chess is an important part of the Cold War and like showing sort of your nation's approach to things.
It's kind of like a metaphor for the Cold War itself, right? It was essentially one big chess game, right? As opposed to being a war fought with a big bomb that they made at the bomb factory that his dad worked at.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mike, I cut you off. What were you saying?
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's super funny because it seems to go right along the side with like I'm sure you've seen some of the memes with like America celebrating once they win the space race because they made it to the moon, and everything else to kind of count along the way. I get the same vibe from like chess not being important until we started winning at it.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's very entertaining.
And when we get to that, I will talk about it because it exploded in popularity.
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
1972, notably the first time we were good at it publicly.
So much so that there was a Columbo episode dedicated.
This is a recurring bugbear on the podcast I found. Eventually, I'm gonna have to watch it.
We'll and we will discuss. But I did actually want to pose a question, both of you. I think now's a good time when we're talking about how Russia was putting so much time and effort into training people playing the game, and that is how much of this sort of chess genius stuff do you think is practice, learning, and understanding, and how much do you think is inherent talent? So I open that up to both of you.
Michael, I'll let you go first.
Great, yeah. Well, I'd say that it's honestly surprising the more you look at it, and if you look at any interviews with top level players nowadays, I mean, there's a whole lot that goes into it, and that theory sort of has expanded, and I think that was sort of part of that developmental phase, because nowadays there's a lot that goes into training, but I'd say that, a big part of it is practice and repetition, because there's a lot of these patterns and stuff you need to be able to pick up. It's a lot of a sort of a spatial sort of mind, I guess, that you need, and you need to be good at remembering patterns, because the fact is people say, oh, well, there's billions of combinations, but in reality, there's still a lot, like endless possibilities for the game. But what you're going to deal with in top level games, they're going to be very similar situations, and it's going to require some sort of knowledge, knowing, oh, look at this, I've been in this sort of situation before, albeit maybe with a piece or down a piece.
So you'd say it's like experience more over maybe experience hand in hand with problem solving then?
I would definitely,
my take as well.
Yeah.
And the reason I brought this up is because they did interview Malcolm Gladwell of what's that book called?
The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People,
whatever.
Or whatever it's called. We all know the one.
Which has been largely debunked. But I do think it has, at least for some things, there is an application of doing it a lot, at least with purpose and like learning in a way, not learning wrong and then practicing a bunch. Obviously, you're going to get good at something. So that's very interesting. I was curious about that because I do think it depends on the sport and the art. And chess is usually sold as kind of a strategy game, like a psychology game, right? Where it's like war, and you're trying to figure out what they do next. Like you're having all these moves planned out in your mind. But so that's interesting to me that you say that it's more about remembering situations you've been in the past and adapting, responding. And it reminded me of what Bobby Fischer said, which is he doesn't believe in the psychology of the games. He just believes in good moves.
Yeah, and that's so the thing about all the combinations, right? It's obviously there's only a couple good ones. There's a reason that there are openings that are known to be like bad, right?
Right.
And that's something that the liars behind Deep Blue had to work out when they were making it. This I am standing on this soapbox. Is like there's these billions of possible chess games, but most of those moves are going to make you lose, and they had to pretend that they had figured out a way to sort out the good ones from the bad ones. Okay, I'll stop hating on Deep Blue now, but it's a very interesting thing. So let's see, where am I? Okay,
Deep Blue is to Matt what Catholicism is to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Just kidding, Catholics. Yep. Nothing but love.
Look, we love our Catholic listeners.
Except for Pope Francis.
Yeah, friend of the show.
Friend of the show.
But so throughout much of the 60s, Bobby had a pretty erratic string, which stayed true throughout his life, I guess. It was a pretty erratic string of victories, and then also some like devastating, just crushing losses. And like 2 or 3 like semi-retirements where he was like, I'm done with chess, and then someone would offer him some money and be like, he'd come back out of retirement. And I'm just going to focus on a couple games I think that are sort of illustrative of our bigger points and like the portrait of Bobby Fischer we're trying to make. So this is one we're going to be talking about a character who I know Michael and I both have a love for, which is to say when he was only 17, he played against the Soviet grandmaster Mikhail Tal, who might be my favorite chess player of all time. And so just before this is the only long quote I have for the episode, but I wanted to read it in its entirety because it's just so good. So Tal was known for his very friendly nature. He was a likable person. Even Bobby Fischer, towards the end of his life, liked Tal, which is a sign that he was a very likable person. But he also is known for his like penetrating stare during his games. Michael, do you want to tell us anything about the stare before I go into this quote?
Oh yeah. So Tal it's funny because I've been reading this. It's not autobiography, it's a biography, and it's written in a format where he's describing a lot. He's answering questions from an interviewer. And you definitely get this feel that he has sort of this playful energy about him. But to anyone that might not have experience with him, it comes off as very intimidating, very intense. I mean, there's a story of another Soviet, I believe, who came to a tournament wearing these big, goofy glasses. That way they wouldn't get like annihilated by his stare. You know, they wanted protection against the radiation just emanating from this man, just the pure energy of his attacking prowess. It's very funny. So yeah, he definitely had a reputation for his stare.
Yeah. So,
I was gonna say the picture for him on Wikipedia. He's doing the stare right at me, and it's working.
He had a very intense like aura about him, even though he was also, of course, like very playful and friendly. So here's a quote on his first game against Tal, and it's just funny to see this because Endgame is it's pretty pro Bobby Fischer. Like obviously, especially towards the end of his life, he has some criticisms. But especially early on, he's very sympathetic to him. And so I just love hearing this story because Michael and I have a story about this game that we've heard from Tal's perspective. And I just love hearing it from Bobby's side. Okay, so here's the quote. He became annoyed at Tal's comportment at and away from the board. This time, the stare began to rankle him. Tal, in a seeming bid to increase Bobby's irritation, also offered a slight smile of incredulity after each of the American's moves, as if he were saying, "Silly boy, I know what you have in mind. How amusing to think you can trick me." Fischer, deciding to try and use Tal's tactics against him, tried producing his own stare, and even flashed Tal an abbreviated, sneering smile of contempt. But after a few seconds, he'd break eye contact and concentrate on the more important things, the action on the board, the sequence of moves he planned to follow, or the ways to counter the combination Tal seemed to be formulating. Tall was an encyclopedia of kinetic movement. All in a matter of seconds, he'd move a chess piece, record the action on his score sheet, position his head within inches of the clock to check the time, grimace, smile, raise his eyebrows, and, quote, make funny faces, as Bobby characterized it. Then he'd rise and walk up and down the stage while Bobby was thinking. Tall's coach, Igor Bondarevsky, referred to his charge's movements as, quote, circling around the table like a vulture, presumably a vulture ready to pounce. Tall chain-smoked and could consume a pack of cigarettes during the course of a game. He also had the habit of resting his chin on the edge of the table, peering through the pieces and peeking at his opponent, rather than establishing a bird's eye view by sitting up straight and looking down, which would have provided better perspective on the intricacies of the board. Since Tall's body language was so bizarre, Fischer interpreted it as an attempt to annoy him. And he goes on like this for several more pages about...
I feel like that says more about Fischer than it does
exactly.
Paul, right?
That's what I was
like. This guy just has ADHD.
Yeah, exactly. That's the very funny thing, right? I don't want to do any armchair diagnoses,
right?
But
of course.
Especially like think about like his difficulty holding eye contact. It's funny that it just reads like the two most neurodivergent people in the room trying to interact with each other. And just like, each of them and their own like weird little quirks is like psyching the other one out so much that they don't know what to do.
That's so funny.
Sorry, I'd like to interject here. I just want to say it's super funny because, I believe Roswell brought up this quote already. He says like, what was it? I don't believe in psychology, or I don't believe in playing mind games, basically. He says like, it's all on the board, right?
Right.
But especially with someone like Bobby, I feel like maybe what he meant by that is maybe, I don't try to psych out my opponents, but he certainly seemed psyched out by a lot of his own opponents. Like he felt that other people were doing those moves against him, which is very funny. He definitely was mindful of that element of the game.
Especially in his game against Spassky later on as well.
Right.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, and then Michael, would you like to deliver Tall's side of the story, particularly his smile of incredulity?
Oh, that was so funny. So there's a specific point in this game that comes up where Tall makes just a slight inaccuracy, and he realizes this can be exploited if Bobby finds the right move. And now, back in the day, you would write down your move before you move the piece. This was just standard, but you do record your moves in a form of notation. And so Bobby writes down his move, and he's just giving it like a last thought. And he kind of glances up at Tall, and Tall looks at it, and he sees Bobby looking up at him, and he's like, "Shoot, he found it." And now, what's he doing? He's like, it almost felt like he was looking at me he was looking to me for approval for this move. And he said, "Well, I wanted to congratulate him. I mean, I didn't want to like seem." I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was very funny, and it felt like a friendly sort of notion where it's like, well, good job. And so like, I don't want to like feel crushed, but I don't want to, feel condescending either. And so he gives him this smile because it just seems like the right thing to do. Just a friendly, like, all right, you got me. And Bobby sees this man smiling at him, and he's like, what have I done wrong? Like he knows, like they know they're thinking the same thing, except they're really not. And so Bobby erases the move and finds a different, worse move, and then proceeds to lose the game because of it. If he had just stuck with his original move, not getting psyched out by the smile, then he would have won that game, which is just so funny.
Yeah, and Tall has been quoted as after the game, basically walking up to him going like, "Bobby, you had me. Like, why did you change the move?" And Bobby's response was, "Well, you laughed when I played it." Which, on top of being a very funny anecdote, right?
Yeah.
It's very illustrative of Bobby's sort of like his very paranoid approach to the game and the world in general.
Absolutely. And I think it is funny, but like kind of knowing the context of the rest of his life, it's also a little bit, I think, sad, because I think that also has something to do with his trouble with connecting with other people, and probably why he felt so lonely is that he sort of, I don't want to say was impugning bad motives on Mikhail there, but he was assuming the worst as opposed to just taking it at face value, right?
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, let's keep moving right along.
Right, yeah. Sorry. Oh, this might be a long episode. Sorry about that one, Roswell. We've thrown you to the wolves for editing.
It's all right.
But, okay, so yeah, in 1962, he played a tournament where he was defeated, and he accused the 4 Soviet grandmasters in attendance of colluding against him to keep him from the top spot. which is a side note. Almost everybody agrees that they probably did. So whenever the Soviets played against each other, they would just immediately play for a draw, which gives you, Michael, remind me if I'm wrong, but I believe it means that you get a half point.
Yeah.
And
I
it
know
would
that
also
these
mean
games...
they weren't... No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know that it differs depending on the format, which is interesting because he was very particular about it. Later in life, he tried to change the format of even the World Championship itself. But yeah, generally speaking, you will get some points, and it's better than just losing. So yeah, you could definitely make a coordinated effort there to just be getting half points for these games.
And they would also, of course, not be expending all of their time and effort on each other. And so when they went up against Bobby, they each like crushed him. And so Bobby
classic
went out,
communist mindset there.
Look, they're working as a team. It's that camaraderie. But yeah, so he of course accused them of colluding. There's no way to prove it, even though now almost every chess historian goes, yeah, they absolutely were. Which I imagine didn't help his growing sense that there was a conspiracy against him. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit. We're going to go to 1972 now. This is the big game. This is the one that everybody knows. So he finally got the opportunity to play against the current reigning world champion, Boris Spassky, who, if you couldn't guess from the name, was a Soviet. And he's
actually Welsh, fun fact.
This was a huge deal, right? Because at the time, like I said, Soviet Union had been top dog in the chess world for 24 straight years.
Right.
And so this tournament was going to be in Iceland, and getting Bobby to go there was like pulling teeth. Like, he would get slightly closer to the airport and then turn around and run away. There was one time where they got him in the airport, and a reporter saw him, and he turned and sprinted out the door and got in a limo and drove home.
Yeah. Which I think that was very like humanizing and relatable to me, because like, I don't know what I would do if I was like trying to go about my life and people just like kept walking up and taking pictures of me. Like, I think that's like, people are like, oh, this crazy guy, but it's like, someone who's like shot into the public eye at a young age and is being now harassed by a bunch of people, essentially.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of fair, but at the same time, he'd committed to this agreement to be in this chess game, and the days were ticking closer and closer. That's not a term. The clock was ticking, and the days were kind of getting on as to when this had to take place, and it was becoming very worrying that he might not show at all, which would be very disappointing.
Of course, the Soviets were, in classic form, insulted by this. They thought that it was Bobby playing mind games and not just being insane.
Right.
And the two big things that really pushed Bobby over, both of which I would like to just sort of note. One is he received a personal phone call from Henry Kissinger, which, interesting, eye emoji.
Eye emoji.
And the other one, maybe not as immediately eye emoji, but for me, let me tell you, I went down a rabbit hole, is one Jim Slater, a British multimillionaire, personally doubled the prize money for this world championship. Now, just a brief little sidebar about Jim Slater. So he belonged to a group called the Claremont set, which is a group of rich British people, and included like Ian Fleming and a lot of other like weird intelligence connections. There were members of Le Cercle there, and also, notably, the Bilderberg. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's basically like it's like deep state con, effectively. It's a few notable attendees include like Tony Blair, Emmanuel Macron, and Bill Clinton, who all attended a few years before taking the highest seats of power. And one other Bilderberg note that I would like to make is in 1966, the top item of their agenda was restructuring NATO. And since that meeting, every single permanent NATO Secretary General has attended at least one Bilderberg meeting prior to be appointed. But, fortunately, it's not like NATO has any history of being run by Nazis or anything, so I'm not too worried about it. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. Look, I had to go down the rabbit holes where I could.
I'm not. I appreciate that. That was very informative. I just love the way you editorialize. Please continue.
But yeah, so anyway, they finally get Bobby there. And then Fischer just does not show up to the first game. Well, at least not at first.
Well, he does.
Yeah.
They're worried because he's not there on time, and so they start his clock.
Yeah, so Spassky just like starts his clock, which baller move.
Pretty sick. He opens with a. Do you remember what he opened with, Michael?
Ooh, I want to say it was an English opening the first game. I'm going to look this up real quick just to make sure, but I think it was an English opening.
Yeah, so Spassky makes his move and then punches Bobby's clock. It's like, all right, well. And so then Bobby runs in 9 minutes later.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of time in chess.
That's a lot of time, yeah.
And so he runs in and says like, yeah, sorry, I got stuck in traffic. And then starts playing. And some have speculated this was an intentional move on Bobby's part, that he was like trying to play mind games, get into the psychology. But most of the people close to him are like, no, this is just Bobby being Bobby.
Yeah, he was probably just nervous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would be too, right?
Yeah. Well, and especially if you think about, like, not to derail like this first game, but just briefly, he had mentioned, and other people mentioned, that like national prestige, like America essentially was at stake here, and everyone was telling him about it. Yeah, exactly. And so that's an immense amount of pressure to place on a mentally ill man with all these eyes watching him. So he was understandably a bit perturbed at this first game.
Yeah, it'll be stressful, right? Like, you have like these spooked up British millionaires like doubling the cash.
Yeah,
Henry Kissinger's
exactly.
calling you, going like, the fate of the nation is at stake. I need you to win. And
I have the scariest voice on the planet, Bobby. You will do what I say.
It is crazy how he just sounds exactly as evil as he is. But anyway,
That's so true.
So Michael, there's one notable part of this game that I imagine you probably have prepared.
Yeah.
Right? The game at this point is in a dead draw, and Bobby makes a baffling move that people still talk about.
Yeah.
Now, would you like
this
to tell
one,
us?
it's interesting. I think the first time I heard about this principle was actually when I was watching an analysis of this game. And ever since I've known you're not supposed to do it. He took a pawn on the very side in a structure where there are 3 pawns together. They hadn't moved yet. And basically, he did this with the bishop. And basically what this does is it locks your bishop in, and he's just trapped in jail. And so you need some sort of plan to send in. You need other pieces nearby to coordinate, or this needs to be a well-timed sacrifice, maybe to draw another piece away to go actually collect that bishop. But the long and short of it is, you can calculate it, and I can calculate it. Like, I could see far enough ahead as a player my rank, who's not even half of his own ELO rating at this point when he was doing this match. I could make the calculations necessary in order to recognize that you're just losing a bishop, which is not what you want to do in an endgame. You don't want to lose a piece for nothing. And so basically, when you're looking at it, it was just a blunder. I mean, he just made a mistake and he lost the game because of it. And you wonder what was happening. And I think it's fair to say that the pressure was still being felt. It's not like he just got into the zone and it was all good at that point. He was still going through things at this point.
And I think it's also important to mention for our non-chess people, because I, as a non-chess person, didn't know this, but him losing this game was not him losing the championship, because these two players would play, I believe it was 24 games against each other.
24 was the initially agreed upon thing. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention that up front.
No,
Which is
an
insane amount of chess playing, especially at this level. Like,
absolutely,
you can tell why so many chess players go crazy when you hear about that sort of thing. Like, that is so much mental and physical pressure. Like, Bobby Fischer, also you look at like, modern grandmasters, right? Like Magnus Carlsen, they're built like trucks because it is such like a physically exhausting. Yeah, exactly. But like, they're literally like the Giga Chad Wojak, where he has like the big brain and the giant muscles. Like, but anyway, so he blamed his loss on the cameras and said that they were like making noises that were distracting him. And he just, I think in part because he was so psyched out by making such a clear blunder, he just didn't show up to the second game and forfeited. So he was now at a 2-point deficit, which there's usually no coming back from that sort of thing. Yeah. But in the third game, Fischer insisted that it would be played in a separate sealed room with no one else in there and just one CCTV camera recording them. which people would then watch and then like report to the news what was going on. And Spassky, to his credit, heard this insane demand and went, yeah, okay.
Yeah. And honestly, I came to appreciate Spassky over the course of this game because he showed a lot of poise and countenance, I guess you could say, in opposition to some sort of very insane things that Bobby was doing. And also, you have to remember he was in a similar situation, the same amount of pressure. No doubt he was nervous too. But he never seemed to be begrudging to the way Bobby was acting, which I think I really appreciated about Spassky. He just seems kind of like at least through what I've watched, which was this game, just seems kind of like a cool dude who's just trying to play some chess.
Yeah, he was very famously even-keeled, which is why it's so notable that, especially in that first game, he got, like, visibly agitated by Bobby not being right. Like, he started walking around and, like, pacing and, like, running his hands through his hair.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I agree. Like, all credit to Spassky. And obviously, I'm a little predisposed to like him. So the fact that you also like him is a good sign, I think.
Uh-oh. We'll put that on the chalkboard of our ongoing duel. Just another tick for you.
But anyway, so Fischer wins this third game, which is big, right? This is his first actual victory. And I'm not going to give a play-by-play for every other game. I am going to mention that at the sixth game is, like, game 6 between them is widely regarded as one of the best games in the history of chess.
Yes.
And they said it in the documentary, right? The victory was so, like, flawless and so, like, well done that at the end, when Fischer got, like, a standing ovation, Spassky himself also stood up and, like, applauded him because, he respected the craft and, like, the brilliance that was clearly on display.
Yeah.
So anyway, from there, Fischer won. He, after 21 games, Spassky decided that he was just going to call it a day, and just said, like, Bobby Fischer is the new world champion. And a little later on in his life, Spassky he and other Russians alleged that part of the reason his game suddenly took a turn was that he had been targeted with radiation, or that there had been bugs implanted in his room.
He even actually said that, like, while this was happening.
I wanted to say that too, yeah.
So that kind of feeling wasn't out of nowhere. And I think it's important to mention he forfeited. At a certain point.
Yeah, he just decided not to attend because he was.
He pulled a Bobby Fischer and just did not attend.
Which, hey, the power move.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, no. So yeah, there's that interview that he gave where he's like, "I'm not usually a suspicious person, but I am a little suspicious."
Yeah, exactly.
And I just think it's interesting. Maybe I shouldn't have made fun of everybody for Havana syndrome. It's possible that they were targeting him with the radiation, right?
Hey, I famously had it, so if you recall a few episodes ago.
But so in my notes underneath the radiation thing, I just put Havana syndrome real in parentheses in question. Anyway, so this victory is it was huge, right? Because the Americans have toppled the Soviets in this battle of wits, and so chess explodes in popularity in America.
Right. Well, I thought it was fascinating because as this was going on, this was a big deal while it was had. This was like natural because, of course, you think about it, it's like if you're in America, your country's biggest adversary, now you're going against each other in like sort of an ideological battle in a very small televised scale. Of course, everybody's paying attention. And so there was these amazing like vignettes of them cutting to different people in America that they were interviewing about chess. And it was, to me, very fascinating to see the wide swath of people of different ages, races, and backgrounds being interested in this game for shrimpy armed nerds, essentially. But you know what I mean? Like it's sort of a niche thing you wouldn't expect to have the same acclaim as like football, right? And suddenly this is a national event.
Yeah, I did like the one guy they interviewed who said that he thought Fischer was going to win because Fischer was playing for money, but if Spassky won, then the government would take it all. Which
I remember hearing that. That was so
incredible
funny.
Analysis of the intricacies of chess there.
Yeah, you got it.
So anyway, this victory, unfortunately, is also where Fischer specifically started to take a turn for the worse, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So a Soviet international master, actually, in 1973, when they talked about Fischer received all these offers for like brand deals and all these things, and he didn't take most of them.
Yeah.
So this other international master, what's his name? George Koltanowski, said in 1973 that Fischer was paranoid and didn't trust anyone. Hang on, let me quote him here. He said, "There's a word for it in German, Verfolgungswahn, I believe. This is, like I said, we're back to me butchering German on Mike, which means...
It's okay, they deserve it.
Which literally translates to persecution mania. And
interesting.
If I have not heard a better analysis of Bobby Fischer's psychology than persecution mania...
Yeah, it's a persecution complex, essentially, right? Yeah. That's fascinating, and I think it's a very good read of what is going on in his mind a lot of times.
So, when Fischer was defending his status as world champion, he made like this, frankly, very unreasonable list of demands for his game against Anatoly Karpov, which was, if I remember right, I forgot to write them down, but it was that there would be no limits on the number of games. In the case of an even number of draws, like an even score after 9 games each, then Fischer would be declared the victor. And one other one. So basically it meant that Anatoly Karpov, who was playing against him, would have been fighting uphill the entire time.
Right.
And, the people reviewing his demands said, no, absolutely not. What are you thinking? And so Fischer forfeited. He just refused to attend, which I personally think is a loss for the game of chess, because Karpov was also a brilliant player, and watching those two face off, I think, would have been very interesting.
Yeah, and there was an interesting kind of read on that situation. I think it was one of his friends in the documentary who was being interviewed said something, or no, actually it was Anatoly himself. He said it was Karpov. He said something along the lines of that, like Bobby was so used to being this impervious, unbeatable chess god, that to actually have to go out and defend it was scary to him, because if you go out to play a game, there's never a non-zero chance. There's always a non-zero. Wait, there's never a chance you won't lose.
Yeah,
is what I'm trying to say. Like, there's always a chance of failure, no matter how good you are, and that is scary, especially to somebody who's been at the top for so long. So he chose, that kind of mental. By making all these unreasonable demands that they wouldn't meet, he could then justify to himself, well, I'm still on top, not having played this game, because we haven't gone against each other, and I'm being unjustly persecuted by not being allowed to play in the way that I want, or whatever.
Yeah, and Karpov, in that very it's a very Russian poetic style. He said something to the effect of "He who never plays shall never lose," or something like that.
Yeah, which is a very good quote.
It's a very good quote, and it's also a very Karpov quote. Michael, do you? Yeah. I don't want to put you on the hot seat, but do you happen to have any Karpov anecdotes that you can just pull out as we go? He's a favorite of mine, so.
I wish we had an anecdote. I will say that something, and it does lead into an adjacent point that I was thinking of, especially when you mentioned both Karpov and Kasparov, is the fact that those two had a little bit of a rivalry going for quite a while. And I want to say that they ended up on different respective sides of this whole thing. I like to imagine it as the chess world schism that happens. This is after Bobby Fischer, but there's a whole part where the International Chess Federation, FIDE, the one that was the standard until this point, has a splinter group that breaks off, and they form their own. I want to say it's Kasparov that runs this other one for a bit, but he says, we are actually the World Chess Organization. And so there's competing forces, and I want to say that they're on different sides of that. But this did come as a result of these different disagreements. And so what I'm trying to get at with all this is the fact that, I think people pay a special attention to it with Bobby because he did it so frequently, and also he seemed to have a personality that just sort of fit it. But he is certainly not alone in wanting to make demands or feeling like he was unjustly treated. It's not like this was completely new precedent for the chess world. I think it did come to a different level, and you could definitely see how the pressure that he was under sort of led to an extreme circumstance of it. but he's certainly not alone in it. And I feel like you have to give him the benefit of the doubt there, just recognizing that there were other players at different points, even these guys in the same time period, who we still respect, but they still felt like there were more arguments to be made than just what was going on over the board.
Yeah, I always forget that there was a Holy Roman Empire of the International Chess Federation.
Yeah, exactly. I love it so much. It's so funny. Too much to get into right now, but it is interesting.
Yeah, Kasparov, I believe, also later on became like an outspoken like anti-Russian guy. Was that Kasparov, or was that
that was another little fuel in their rivalry there between Kasparov and Karpov?
Yeah, but anyway, so then through the 70s, Bobby would call up friends. He fell in with this fundamentalist, some might say doomsday cult, church called the Worldwide Church of God at the time. And Roswell, did you have anything you wanted to say about them as we...
What I said to you before we started recording, which was, ew, spooky.
Yeah, pretty much.
But just kind of a broad strokes of the Worldwide Church of God. It's currently known as Grace Communion International, and it was originally known as the Radio Church of God. But at the time that Bobby was associated with it, it was the Worldwide Church of God, which I believe you said were all scary names.
Yeah, pretty much.
which I have to agree with you. It was started by a guy named Herbert Armstrong, who was a radio and televangelist, which already something I'm not a big fan of.
Yeah.
But you know, it's received a lot of criticism from other like Christian sources, and it's essentially been alleged as a cult by a lot. I won't go so far to say that, but it is. At least under Armstrong it was. But I just wanted to briefly read. There was a really funny thing that made me laugh to give you exactly like the idea of what kind of church this was. So this Armstrong guy, on his Wikipedia page, under his personality, personal conduct, and governance subsection, I'm just going to read this directly. It says, Armstrong was often criticized for having lived in extravagant wealth in comparison to a few church members. Personal luxuries enjoyed by Armstrong included a personal jet, the finest clothing, furniture, and other conveniences. And then after that, there's 8 sources. Just the most sources cited in a row.
Incredible.
It's so funny. But yeah, this was kind of one of those, he was sort of ripping off some Adventist type stuff and even a little bit of Mormon stuff and some other things. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of it was essentially, I don't want to call it a doomsday cult, but it was kind of on the edge of that, where they were preaching rapture and revelation. Mm-hmm. And they're like, yeah, it's coming soon, which they said from World War II to the 80s and presumably till now. A few times it seems they gave, like, I think 1975 they gave as a date, like, oh, it's gonna happen.
And 1975 is so interesting because in a strangely lucid moment, something that somehow most people who are in like doomsday cults don't figure this one out, but Bobby did. When the doomsday prophecy didn't come true, he immediately went, oh, wait a minute, and then left the church.
Which is pretty sick.
Yeah, which weirdly doesn't happen a lot of the time.
It usually doesn't happen. That's actually a thing, which is there's I think a book or a study on that called When Prophecy Fails, which is a pretty interesting read. We don't have time to get into now. But yeah, and that was sort of the I think the extent of his relationship with the church. He would go on later to like very like virulently deny being in the church or being a part of the church, which, you know, was not true. he was pretty connected. And then after that, that's kind of when
he really went off the deep end.
He really went off the deep
reading like the protocols of the Elders of Zion and things like that. Which, not good.
Also, Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
And some of the, I thought this was very interesting. He also had some books by Ben Klassen. Do you know anything about Ben Klassen?
Oh, I know that name. Hang on.
Yeah.
What did he do?
Well, he was the founder of the World Church of the Creator, which was an atheist church, but also it was anti-Semitism, scientific racism, homophobia, and white supremacy.
Oh, so they're playing all the hits.
Yeah. So, which, you know, when we talk about, when we analyze Fisher's statements on Jewish people. This sort of makes sense that he fell into this. Is this a good place to just pivot into his dirty, disgusting beliefs?
Yeah, so here I've got a couple things lined up that I'll just burn through. So just as a side note, this period onward is what a lot of like Fischer's like followers or like people who study him called the wilderness years, which aside from being a pretty cool name, honestly, is I think very accurate, right? At this point, Fischer is clearly lost, right? He's wandering around, and he, as we know, he grabbed onto some very repellent things in an attempt to sort of make sense of everything. So yeah, he, like we said, he like started reading like Mein Kampf and just really went off the deep end. In 1992, he played a rematch against Spassky in Yugoslavia, which was in violation of sanctions on the country. You couldn't do anything economic there, and he won $1 million there, which counts as economic participation, I think. So this, he had to become an expat because he faced up to 10 years in prison if he ever returned home. And then, following the September 11th attacks on America, he openly expressed approval of the attacks, which is a wild take.
It is.
Yeah, so he stated that, direct quote, "What goes around comes around, even for the United States." Which
fair.
If he had stopped at that, we would sort of have to hand it to him.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, he then did immediately pivot that into a tirade against Jews, saying that he hoped that a military coup would occur, and then they would arrest and execute all of the leaders of Jewish synagogues, which...
horrible.
It's
repulsive.
Really bad.
It's very bad.
And in response, pretty much, it's viewed by many people as a direct response to particularly his statements about 9/11. The Bush administration, the new Bush administration, not the H.W. Bush, they revoked his passport. Yeah, exactly. The good Bush administration. So they revoked his passport which led to him being beaten and imprisoned in Japan when he attempted to get on a plane because his passport wasn't legal.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you know anything about them beating? That's like, I mean, obviously ACAB, right? Even Japanese cops, but that was sort of interesting to me that they beat him.
Yeah. So what have you got, Michael? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I didn't realize there was any actual, like, substantial stuff on this. I thought this was just his story about it.
Well, it is his story, but it's put in Endgame. Like, the first chapter of Endgame is him getting beaten up by the Japanese police with, like, a hood being pulled over his head. And honestly, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt that it happened.
I don't either. Based on my understanding of the Japanese judicial
it's
system.
Not great.
I mean, just looking at them, you'd be like, those guys couldn't beat me up with their silly blue helmets, but...
Yeah, and then you're like, oh no, there's a hood over my head. So anyway, from here, he's in prison for a while, and he can't go, because he's a man without a country, before Iceland, our old friends, reach out to him, and they give him a passport, and then later on, just full citizenship, because the country feels indebted to him, right? Not only did his game against Spassky put chess on the map, it also put Iceland on the map.
Yeah.
For a lot of people.
Something I thought was kind of interesting and vaguely sweet was one of the guys who really fought for him, whose name I'm now forgetting. It was probably like Jarl Claglerson or something. But it was I'm sorry. It was one of the gentlemen. We do. I do love Iceland, but he was one of the gentlemen who was I believe he's the event organizer for the original game against Spassky. And so he went in front of the Icelandic government and sort of fought for Bobby to get this. And like you said, that sort of feeling of being indebted, they granted it to him, and he was brought to Iceland.
That does remind me, actually. I forgot to mention this when we were talking about the game, but another sort of charming anecdote. A lot of the documentary was just sort of me like smiling as like very sweet Icelandic men told stories.
Yeah.
But in one of my favorite stories, the same event organizer talked about how in the third game, because of Bobby's demands, Spassky started to get a little frustrated with them and said that he was like, okay, I'm done. You can just have this title. I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah.
And the organizer said that he grabbed them both by the collars and just forced them to sit down and said,
yes,
you will start playing now. Effectively, by hook or by crook, I am making you guys play this chess game. This will not fall through. Which I thought was very funny.
Very good, yeah. it really makes you appreciate the Icelandic folk.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, if you had something else about that specifically, you can.
Oh, no, I was just going to go back to sort of his Iceland, his, return.
Okay, yeah. I was going to say, it was just one other thing. I want to say this was more in reference to his jail time he would need in America. I'm trying to remember which ones it was. I want to say it was one or two of the Russian grandmasters he had played against at one point or another said, well, if Fischer's going to have to serve time, provided we're given a chessboard, we'll just join him in jail, as sort of like a show of support for him. So I do think it's interesting. Just another example of these people around him, even if they didn't necessarily have the most positive experiences, just reaching out and like saying, we're going to back him.
Yeah, and they respected him, even though at this point he'd already gone off the deep end. I think a lot of people still respected. Maybe it's not even a man who still was there, but they did respect Bobby Fischer as this like looming figure in the world of chess.
Yeah.
And that's
and you can't deny the effect he had. I'll say, as a man who learned about chess 25 minutes ago, you cannot deny his effect on the crowd.
Yeah, so I just have a couple notes, and then we can sort of wrap up. I just have a couple discussion questions for the class.
Well, to round out his biography, he did die in Iceland in 2008, right? And I just wanted to mention, I found it very poignant that he died in the same place that his largest achievement took place, just sort of alone and alienated. I found that incredibly sad, like most of this documentary. I just felt really, really bad for the guy, in spite of some of his more incendiary and downright evil beliefs.
Yeah. And that's really the last thing that I had to say about him is like, especially in this documentary, and I've seen other footage of him from this time in his life, he is undeniably, like at this point, a very broken man, a very lonely man. And you can tell there's this anger in him that we talked about earlier, right? It's just sort of like seething beneath the surface, and he never seems to know where to direct it. And I think the fact that he latched on to conspiracy theories is understandable, right? I do this podcast. I think he didn't find the right ones, right? And his anger, instead of being directed
and we did.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, we found the right ones, fortunately. You will never find us like blaming the Jews for anything.
It's true.
And I think he just sort of directed it towards the wrong people, right? Like the Jews, the communists following him and reading his mind. Like and of course, doing that really sadly, obviously, it only alienated him from the world further, because even like some of his last few friends talked about how they eventually just had to cut ties because, a lot of them were Jewish, right? And they, he would just suddenly break into these rants about like the evil nature of the Jew. And eventually you just need to walk away from something like that.
Absolutely.
And my last real note about him before we jump into the, the last question I have about him, right, is another thing from the documentary, actually, where Bobby talked about a conversation he had with another great chess player, Larry Evans, who would also write music. And he said that one day he sat there in the 60s and he was talking with him. He was like, Larry, I wish I could write music like you. I try, but nothing comes out when I try to write music. And Larry responded with, well, that's because you haven't lived. And Bobby, when he tells that anecdote, sort of laughs about it. But I think it's also on some very deep level, it's true, right? Bobby never really lived outside of chess. And also, just as a side note, Larry Evans was Jewish, right? And it's just a very sad story at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah. I think one of my takeaways from it was, of all the things we could lay the blame for his fate at, aside from himself, I think one we haven't mentioned was sort of like our kind of cultural drive for, I don't know if you'd call it American exceptionalism, but that sort of very grind set cult, for lack of a better term, where it's just like, all you would do is drill, focus on chess, Steve Jobs, focus on your goal, reach out, work, accomplish it. And if you spend your entire time and energy focused on one thing that is not people or like helping other people or connecting with the world around you, history might remember you, or maybe your actions, or maybe one specific tournament, but you'll end up in the metaphorical sense, in Iceland alone, racist and sad.
Yeah.
And, you know, I say that sort of jokingly, but like I think it's true when you look at the kind of lives of like people who are inclined to pursue craft in this sense. That seems to be a running theme of the people who don't break out from trying to be the best at something, is that ultimately it's sort of a fruitless endeavor.
Yeah, and I think, I've sort of given my take, I think, on Bobby Fischer and why he was the way he was. Michael, to sort of close us out, do you have anything more that you want to say about him, or why you think he ended up going so crazy at the end of his life?
Yeah. And as one completely unrelated side tangent, but I'd be remiss not to mention, because it did confuse me for a long time until I actually went through the research for this. There is a difference between the game of the century and the match of the century. Both
they are separate ones.
Bobby Fischer. The game of the century, though, was played against Donald Byrne, American international master. So this was a previous game, which sort of put him on the map nationally. And then the match of the century was the series of games he played against Spassky. So completely unrelated. Let's get back to the point. I just had to put that out there in case anyone else does research and they get confused, because it confused the heck out of me. So I'm glad to hear that you guys kind of feel the same way that I do, because for a while when I'd hear these stories, again, like you kind of just pick up some of these stories about like what they were doing outside of a specific game. I was like, man, I just really don't like this Bobby Fischer character. He does not seem pleasant. But like the more that you look into it, the more you get the feeling like, I think there is more going on here. And I feel like he might just be a little bit misunderstood. And of course, people are going to play up these sort of eccentric elements just for the sensation of it. But, you know, I think there is a bit of tragedy there. And it is something I think you need to approach with a level of understanding, albeit with respectful disagreement.
For sure. or even like a forceful disagreement. I think and not to be too philosophical, but I think unfortunately that's kind of the truth with most people, like even even evil people, right? Is, I think, some understanding is incredibly important, because you know, unfortunately we're all wired and, you know, chemically inclined in the same ways. So on a base level, we're all reaching out for the same things. And it's unfortunate that like a lack of these things or some sort of trauma can inform someone to go into a route where they'll be very hurtful to others.
And I think, No, I feel you. And I think it's also just worth noting, right? A lot of very, very high level chess players throughout the years have gone a little crazy, right? Usually they don't reach the depths that Bobby did, but also most of them had this happen to them before like national cameras were a thing, where like you'd be broadcast to the world. And I think something about chess, right? And that, like, you know, like we said, those billions of possible combinations, you're staring into infinity. I think someone might have said something similar in the documentary, right? But of course that'll drive you crazy eventually. Like even if you're approaching it just as like a game, eventually I think staring directly into like the maw of the universe like that will sort of, even the most stable people, I think, could be driven a little crazy by it. And I think it makes it all the more natural to sort of like try and reach out to find a pattern in the real world, something that like matches the sort of things you can find in the game. And if you aren't careful, you might start picking up on patterns that I think aren't really there, right? You know, like very racist or anti-Semitic ones, for instance.
So watch out, Michael.
Yes, exactly. I'm keeping an eye on you. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all that I have on Bobby Fischer.
Yeah.
We ran a little long, but I think that's okay. This is a subject worth running long on.
Yeah, I think it was very fascinating, and it's only tangentially related to our kind of more esoteric conspiracy themes, but it's very historically important.
Yeah.
And it's very fascinating.
Yeah, and that's why I had to dive down that Bilderberg rabbit hole when I found it. I was like, well, hang on.
Throw the boys a bone, right? Yeah. But, you know, and honestly, I will say, if jokingly I was calling it a nerd sport, but I was actually quite riveted and fascinated by the world of chess. And I'm interested now. I'm intrigued, but I think it's fascinating. But so unless there's anything else
I do have
to say.
One final
go
note.
ahead.
Sorry, I forgot to mention this. Bobby Fischer co-authored a couple books on chess, one of which my school library happened to have, and I started reading. It's called Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess. It, for a long time, was the best-selling book on chess. I don't remember if it still is, but it's very good. It's pretty simple. But if you, like me, know a little bit about chess and would like to pretend that you know more than you do, I do recommend it. It's very elegantly written because he had two co-authors who are also very good writers. But yeah, I highly recommend it to anybody who's interested in it. And I think that's really all that I have to say on the matter. So, Michael, I know you're not a big social media guy, but do you have anything you want to plug before we wrap things up?
No, I'm afraid not. I don't have any. I did have one quote that came to mind, which I've told you before, but I feel like it's relevant. By Paul Morphy, also an American, considered unofficial master. They didn't have the official title back then, or there weren't
another guy who went crazy.
Yeah, and he also did kind of go crazy. But as he famously said, the ability to play chess is the sign of a gentleman. The ability to play chess well is the sign of a wasted life. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. That's a pretty good
quote. Sweet. So, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. I don't know what I'm talking about. Please follow us on social media. We're on Twitter at Hist Esoteric and on Instagram at Historica Esoterica, because Instagram is the superior platform in terms of handles.
We have more followers there too.
And some pretty sick designs have gotten posted, so run over there, check them out if you want to see some cool things. I was talking about mine, but yours is good.
Yeah, message me if you want posters to print out and hang up around your local city.
Yeah, please spread that good gospel. That's right. You can also, please, if you haven't already, rate our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts 5 stars if you liked it. If you don't like it, shut up, and that's all right. But yeah, without further ado, I think until next time, I will leave you with the eternal words of chess player William Harston, which is that chess doesn't drive people mad, it keeps mad people sane. Good night.
This young man's name is Bobby Fischer, and already he is the United States chess champion.
He's tedious, he's arrogant, he's inconsiderate. Basically, people think that there's something wrong with the man.
Everybody can have impressions, but the only person who knows what Bobby Fischer is going to do is Bobby Fischer.
Did you have any help?
No.
Did it all by yourself? Did it make people happy?
Made me happy.
He had false, fixed ideas of a very widening conspiracy against him.
They're actually making things happen and causing revolutions and killing people all over the world. They start mixing fish with humans and anything possible.
Paranoid psychosis.
For a communist regime, keeping the crown was very important ideologically.
I think he was unable to cope with his own invincibility. He got more or less scared to sit down again in front of the board and risk losing. But only he who never plays never loses.